forward a lot of years, I would say probably 11 years ago, 10 years ago, well, 2013. So 11 years ago, at Facebook, a group of engineers decided to create, well, not a group of engineers, actually it was one engineer that created what we know today as React, right? And it was something internal. They built them for themselves, basically to allow them to write faster web applications. But it was good, right? And then a lot of people in Facebook started using it, and then they made it open source. And from that point on, I would say 9 of every 10 software engineer jobs out there is, in front end at least, are demanding React, right? So there is a lot of demand for React today. It hasn't changed over the years. Like I remember, actually, I started with React 10 years ago, and the demand is the same. It hasn't changed. And it's really hard to see that in a technology, because usually what you have is that some new technology emerges and then stays there for a while, and then some other technology replaces, right? Not with React. React's like stood the test of time. Like it's been around for a lot of time, and I think it will still be around in a lot more time, because all the good functionality that React comes or brings to creating web applications. The other thing is that the support is really good. There is a lot of code already written for React. There is a lot of, I would say, communities, people that use React. And that means a lot of engineers that know React. So for companies, it's like a no-brainer. It's like if I need to build a software for the front end, I wouldn't decide to build it with something that is not popular, even if it's better, right? Because the better alternatives exist out there. I'm not saying that those are better. Like Svelte is really good, Solid is really good, Vue is really good. So there are other alternatives out there that are really good. But the thing is that there is so many engineers that know React, and it's really easy for an engineer to start using React, that for a company it's a super simple decision. It's like, let's use React because it's a lot of people that already know React, and it's really good for us, right? And there's a lot of companies that use React today. Like you can probably find when you're browsing, by the way, there is an extension that you can install, and it will tell you if a website is built with React or not, and what version even. And you will see that a lot of websites are built with React, like Netflix, Twitter, Facebook, of course. I don't know, you guess. Probably your web application on your bank is built with React. Like a lot of websites use React today, right? It's no longer, I think the only people that don't use React are the Googles. Like because they have this, they only use what they build, so they don't technically use React, but the rest of the world is using React, right? And so that's React that's the history of React. Why React came to be. It's basically, a library. So the first thing is that React is a library. Okay, it's a UI library. That means that it's a library that allows to build interfaces, user interfaces, right? That's the only purpose of React. Allows to represent user interfaces. Remember from last class we were talking about rendering, right? And state. That's the purpose of React. So the purpose of React is from state. Let's say this is my application state. Whatever that state might be, I can render that state, and I will get a web application. So that's what React does in a nutshell, right? It just represents or renders state. And you will see this throughout the program a lot. It's like state, state, state. State is basically the data that represents the status of our application at a certain point, right? So let's say I'm representing a user account let's say I'm representing your Twitter feed, right? Your Twitter feed is represented in terms of data by your user account, so your profile, your image, your, I don't know how many followers, or your followers, your who are you following, and then the feed is basically all the tweets from the last. From the tweets that are relevant for me at that point in time, right? That's the data, but the Twitter application takes that data with React and just renders the whole application, right? Everything is represented there. Your profile is there, your options are there, your Twitter feed is there. It will show you how many followers that you have. You can follow other people, etc. So what I'm saying is that you have state data, and with the process of rendering, you get to an application, right? And that's what React does very well, okay? And that's why it's so popular. Now, how does React does this? And the essence is this word, components. So components is, I would say, the unit. How can I explain components? So components is basically the unit of visual elements on the page. I'm not sure that that makes sense. Let me explain it a little bit better. So everything that you see in a web page can be separated somehow or split into components, right? For example, let me see the web page from the Academy. So this page, right? This is the dashboard, the Academy platform dashboard. If you take a look at this page, you can see that this page has several areas, right, with different information. Like, for example, the top section, the top nav bar, that's a section. And in that top section, we have the logo of the Academy. We have some options, like a menu. And then we have some options on the right, basically the language, I think this is the, yes, exactly, and my account, right? I can see all that information. But all that is a single component. If you think about it, right? That's the component, and the component name is the top bar or whatever. And then you have something on the right, on the left, and that left option is basically the syllabus, and that's another component. And then on the right, I have, let's say, the content of the lesson, or the lesson per se, right? And that's another component. Now, that's a high level. If I go deeper, then in the navbar, I will have a component for the logo, a component for the menu, a component for the language selector, a component for the, by the way, what is the name of this again? How do you call this? The dark mode. The dark mode selector, my accounts drop down. So every one of those is a different component as well. So I can go as high level as I want, meaning the whole app is a component, and then I can go as deep as I want. So every section of the app is a component, but again, every part of that component is also another component, and go on. And so I can go as deep as I want, making components or identifying components in my app, right? And what is this important is because if something breaks in your app, right, I don't have to go through thousands of files to see where is this broken. Like, for example, if the language selector is not working, right, or it's not showing the right options, let's say it's showing English and Portuguese, right? But those are not my settings. I only speak English and Spanish. I know that's broken. I can go to the component for the language selector and just work on that component. So that's the other benefit of component. It encapsulates that behavior in a way that is easy to maintain, right? Like, for example, if someone comes out and says, well, you know, the lesson, this component to show the lesson is not that good, we want to change it, I don't have to change anything else on the page. I only need to change that component. And actually, I can go deeper. I can make another component. Instead of removing the one that I have, I can make another one, and I can switch it, right, anytime I want. And if the people don't like it, I can switch it back to the old component. So you see that now I have functionality that before it was kind of hard to implement, right? Because components allow me that functionality. Another benefit of components is that they are very easy to, I would say, not maintain, it's just easy to create as well, right? Because the thing is, when you're creating an app, you will start with a huge set of pre-created components, right? And if you think about Bootstrap, that's exactly what Bootstrap was proposing, right? Bootstrap had a lot of components already created that we only had to copy and paste, right? And that's it, that's the component. Actually, if you go to the Bootstrap documentation, you will see that it's a section called components, right? They call it like that, components. Yes? Sorry? Oh, sorry. Cool. So what is a component in React? And this is where everything gets super nice. A component in React is just a function. And that's the beauty of it. It's like with a single function, you can represent a whole app or a button inside the app or the language selector or anything inside the app. So because everything is a component. So at the end of the day, a React application is essentially a huge component that has everything inside, right? But again, the top component doesn't have to be that big because it's just, for example, the component for the dashboard in the 4 gigs dashboard is just, oh, this is the navbar, this is the sidebar, and this is the this is the lesson. That's it, right? If I want to go from there, then I can go to the lesson and extract the elements or see the components that the lesson is composed of, because you can use components inside other components. Okay. Now let's see how a React component looks like. And a React component is essentially a function. Okay, that's the first part. A React component is a function. Now we can write this component as any of the 3 types of functions that we can create. We can have it as a function declaration, function expression, or an arrow function. It doesn't matter. Different companies have their own guidelines around that, but it's fine. React doesn't care. Now, to identify, because now we have functions that are actually functions, right? Like if we create a function called sum or average, that's a function that you pass some values and return some values, right? How can we differentiate a React component that is a function from another function? And the difference is, the first one is that the name is written in Pascal case. And this is when, remember that we said that functions and variables in JavaScript, the convention is to use camel case, right? Camel case, all the letters are in lowercase except for the words that are with the initial capitalized or uppercase. But the first one is always lowercase. So this is what camel case looks like. And Pascal case is exactly the same except that the first letter is uppercase, right? So when you see a function where the first letter is capital letter, that's probably a React component, okay? Not necessarily, it might be a different type of function, but that's a very good indication. So first is name is in Pascal case. Remember, this is just a convention. It's to be able to identify them, okay? Now the second one is only one parameter. Only one parameter, and that parameter is an object. Now, React components only have one parameter. So React components are functions that only have one parameter. This parameter is optional, but it's only one, okay? And that parameter is an object, and it's usually called props. but we will find ways where we don't have to even name it because we can extract the properties, right? But it's usually called props. And it's because the way we use it, and you will see it later, what are these props, where did these properties come from? If you remember the exercise from last Friday, we have a render function that was getting a variables object, right? With all the, all the profile card information, like the name, the Twitter account, et cetera, it's exactly the same. It's just a variable that has an object with a bunch of properties, right? Because when you put a component on the page, you need to pass some properties to this component to be able to modify its behavior, right? Let's say I want to modify the behavior of the component for the language selector. The behavior might be, okay, what's the language that is selected right now? You can say English. What are the language choices that I have? Oh, English and Spanish. Okay, so those are the properties. I need to be able to pass that function, that component, some values, data, that the component will use to render the right state, right? And that property is a parameter called props. It's just an object. That's the other. And returns null an array GSX or now this is the part when we can certainly identify that that function is a React component. And React components use, and in React we use something called GSX. I guess that's the name. I didn't know. If that's the case, I mean, Google it. That would be nice to know. Okay, so we use GSX. Now, what is GSX? And actually, this was a very big point of contention. Like, critics of React said that this was the worst design decision around React, is because GSX is no more than a version of HTML. It's kind of HTML, but in JavaScript, right?
JavaScript XML.
It's a
JavaScript syntax extension.
Syntax extension, good. So let me explain why that means that it's kind of HTML, but in JavaScript, right? So if I write this in JavaScript, if I have JavaScript code and I write this expression, let's say const A equals, let's do an H1. What do you think the JavaScript language will tell me?
It would say undefined, or
It will fail, right? Because this is not a valid JavaScript expression, right? If I put it in quotes, well, now it's a valid JavaScript expression because I have like a string that I am assigning to a variable, right? So what GSX is doing is basically making HTML tags and React tags actually part of the JavaScript language. So you can use it as an expression. So that is GSX. Usually files that have GSX in it, they have to have this extension. The GSX extension. Okay? Now, GSX by itself has its own rules, has its own, I would say, options, because remember, we are trying to replace what? The document object model, right? So when we want to, for example, this is pretty straightforward, right? We have an H1 tag, it's basically a header, right? This will be replaced exactly like you see it, but we can have something like this. That's a valid GSX expression, but notice that now there is no language selector tag in HTML, right? That doesn't exist.
it's a component.
But it's a component. And this is the way we use components. Okay? We will learn today in the practice, basically it's learning about GSX. There is a lot of conventions around GSX that we will learn in a minute. But again, going back to a React component is a function when the name is in Pascal case, it has only one parameter, it's optional by the way. So it's a optional parameter. If we don't need to pass any parameters, it's fine. But if you need to pass parameters, it's only one and it's an object, and returns null. GSX or an array of null or GSX. When I say or an array of null or GSX is a React function can return null. And what do you think null means in a component?
Nothing.
Nothing, exactly. So you have a component and that component decides to return null, that means that that component is there, is there on the page, but it's not showing nothing on the page. Still there, right? But it's not showing anything on the page. GSX, well, we will see GSX in a minute, or an array of null or GSX. That means that I can also return an array with GSX or null inside. Okay, so we can return any of these three elements. I think there were some changes in the React frame, in the React library. Not sure that they're already available, where you can return other things like strings or so. I don't think, like if I remember correctly, you cannot return a string. So if you have a React component that returns a string, that's probably incorrect. I will have to check it though, because I haven't tried for a long time. I think they are not available now. Cool, so that's what React component looks like. Now, let's see a React component, an actual React component. So remember, it's just a function. Where the name is in Pascal case, and it has okay. So this is a React component. Again, a function, name is in Pascal case. It has a single parameter called props. By the way, I'm not using that parameter, so I might as well remove it, right? We will see what's the purpose of parameters in a minute. And it's returning GSX, okay? So that's what a React component looks like. Now, once I have the component, what I'm actually creating is a new tag that I can use anywhere in my page. So if I want to use this salute component, I can do it like this. Use it as a tag. So instead of using div or using h1, now you can use salute. And notice that the difference is pretty obvious, right? HTML tags start with lowercase. So when you put a div or an h1 or a button, they are lowercase. But this, right, is not the same as this. The first one is the HTML button tag. And this is the component button, right? Because this is a component and this is just a tag, an HTML tag. Okay? Questions? No?
Do you have to end it with the closing?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just putting an example, making it. Yeah. It depends, because some components can have content inside, and it's pretty common as well. So you can have a tag says, click here, and then close it. Okay? And not sure with a button, but it's pretty common with laying out components. Like, for example, when you want to lay out and you say box, right? A box might be anything. It might be some component that you use to organize your code, right? That might be a box. And whatever you put inside, that component will know where to put it in the page, right?
And of course, you can use a component inside another component.
Yes. That's the point of that. Cool.
So basically, inside of that box, you can use that button.
Yeah, you can use whatever. Yeah, I can use a button here. Yeah. Okay, so this is a very straightforward React component. Actually, this React component is just showing always hello John in the page in a h1 tag, right, in a header. Now, it's a function, and remember the parameters, right? So the first thing that we want to know is how to use the parameter. And the parameter name is props. It's always props, usually by convention. You can name it any way you want, but usually props is the name of that convention. Because props, you will see why. Or you can call it attributes or whatever, but prop is pretty common. Now, props is an object with all the attributes or properties of that component are passed. Like, for example, if I am creating a button here, or the salute, and I say name equals Mary, right? What I'm doing here is I'm saying create this component, salute, and in the properties, pass an object where name equals Mary. So props will be essentially an object with a key name, and the value will be Mary. And that will be my props. So when I want to use those props to render a different content, I can use, remember string interpolation from string templates? The same, but without the $sign. So I can do props.name. And now I created a React component that takes one attribute called name and uses that attribute to generate basically a salute, a header one, a heading or a header. Is a heading or a header? Header? Okay. I think it's heading. Level 1 with hello. I think it's heading, right? Or no? Okay. Headers? Are you sure? Okay.
Where do you use it? Like on a page?
Yeah. I mean, you can use this component. That's the beauty of React. Now I have a component that I can use to make a salute, right? But the thing is that I can call it multiple times. I can call it, like now I'm saluting John. Of course, it's a very contrived example because I'm not going to salute two people in the same page. But let's say I have a component for a video suggestion or a video recommendation, right? I can put as many video recommendation with all the properties that component takes, but I can put a lot of them in a web page, right? I don't have to replicate the same code to make it look like remember Netflix, when you open Netflix? By the way, Netflix is built in React. You can open that, you can see how it's actually built. And that's what they have. It's basically a component that shows the card with the video and all the stuff inside. And when you hover, it will allow you to interact with that video. But it's the same component that they only build once, and they can reuse it everywhere in the page, right?
So they go to the database and then they do
Exactly, just get the information and renders the whole thing, right? Multiple times, because the component is the same, and I can use it anywhere. And I can have another page, like for example, when you open a page and let's say you open a video, and then in that other page, you have also video recommendation, it's the same component. I don't have to copy that code and paste it in that other page. No, I only have to reuse the component again, right?
That's why it's like XML in a way.
Exactly. No, you will see how we do it. But again, it's just encapsulating that behavior so I can use it anywhere in the page. Now, one thing that I didn't tell you about React is that the mantra of React is this. It's that learn once, apply anywhere. One word less, one I don't know. It's like, you can Google it. But this is the idea. Learn once, apply anywhere. So you can learn React and apply it anywhere. When they say anywhere is, you can build web apps with React, you can build mobile apps with React, you can build VR apps with React. Actually, that the Oculus, using the Oculus headsets, that's from Facebook. And this is actually a React VR kit or library that you can use to build VR apps for Quest, right?
You can go native, like.
Yeah, yeah. You can build mobile apps. You can build, like, if you have a smart TV, there's a high chance that that smart TV that app is built with React as well. So it's everywhere, literally, right? It's really nice because now you can build apps for any type of device, right? Web apps, mobile apps, VR apps. What is the other mediums that we have? Maybe phone, smartwatches. Not sure about smartwatches though, but you get the point, right? So that's why it's really nice. It's because, I mean, once you learn it, it's basically everywhere. Cool. Okay, let's move on to GSX. By the way, questions so far?
Can you go back? Where you put the name Mary? What's that? I'm sorry, I didn't have it. On the right.
Name Mary?
In the brackets.
Yeah, yeah.
What is?
It's when I using the component. This is the.
But when you're putting it on your HTML, you're putting smooth name equal Mary.
Mhm.
Or are you putting that the name Mary? Where you
No, not this.
That shows up in a DOM, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, wait.
The name Mary.
Yeah, it will.
Shows up in the DOM.
So this is, remember, this is React, right? React will get transpiled and it will be executed in your web page. Once your application loads in your web page, you no longer see salute because salute is not a real HTML tag. What you will see in the page is h1 hello Mary, because that's the attribute that I pass. Name equals Mary. So here it will take that attribute from the props and it will use that name, right? If I, by mistake, instead of using name, I would say nombre, Mary, nothing will be printed on the page. It will say hello undefined. Why? Because name, I'm not passing that property name, right? I'm passing another property that my component doesn't care about. But if I pass the property name, it will be replaced right here. And it will say hello Mary. Make sense? So props are the attributes that I am passing to the component when I'm running that component or executing that component or using that component. Okay? So this is the way for the component to get information about what it has to render. Let me make another example. If I have a component for the language selector, let's say let's assume I'm working in a new company. Well, let's assume I'm working for 4Geeks as a software developer, and they say, okay, use the language selector component in a new page. And I would find a component, it's probably called language selector. And then I would pass the attributes. And probably the attributes would be something like current language, English. Language choices. Right? And I can pass an array with Spanish and English. Something like this. Notice that the attributes are this. Current language is the name of the attribute. N is the value, right? And then lang choices is the name of the attribute. And the array is the value. Now, the issue with the curly brackets is, remember, the curly brackets allows you to replace JavaScript expressions inside GSX, right? So in this case, my language selector component will get a props array, a props object with this properties current len equals n, and len choices is an array of es and en. Right? And with that information, the component should know what to do, right? First, it will render the flag of the current language, right? And then when I click it, it will show me the options that I have. That's the behavior of that component. But the properties that I'm passing to that component are the current language and the language choices, right? So what I'm saying is that every component requires some type of data, right? To be able to render something different every time. Otherwise, the component will be pretty static, and you don't want that, right? If you create a component like this, let's say you create a component that has a profile, and you are not passing any property, whatever you return here, whatever I return inside this component will always be the same. Because this component is just rendered whatever I'm returning here with no changes. There's nothing different here, right? Because I'm not passing any properties. We will see later in other classes how components can get data from other sources. So far, the only source of data is the props, right? And the other thing is that components will re-render themselves every time the props change, right? So if you have a component, let's say, let's do a component called timer, right? And this component, you can use it like this, right? This component showing a timer, let's say showing like a digital timer, it will show always 1,000, right? That will be it. But if I'm passing a variable, let's say a, and that variable a changes every 1 second from 1, 2, 3, 4, every time that component changes and the property for that timer changes, the component will re-render themselves, right? So a React application that is where the data is changing is always re-rendering. But it only renders the parts that are different, right? The parts that are the same doesn't get re-rendered because there's no need to show that again. Only the parts of the data that are new or changed, it's re-rendered. And actually, if you open a simple way to do this, it's like a framework for that. You see, this is the extension. And yeah, you can, I'm highlighting the changes. So every time there is a change, let's see. You see all the fuss? That's all the parts that change in that application. And notice that some of them change a lot, by the way. Like some of them shouldn't change. Like for example, the top navbar, it shouldn't refresh because it's always the same information. Somehow it's still doing it. But yeah, you get the idea. Let me change that because otherwise the page was super slow. Now, these are all the components. Like for example, the language selector, arrays. Okay, this is the language selector. Let's see if I can find where is that component. Oh, this is a stack. Well, I think I'm getting into the weeds here. You get the idea, right? So what I'm saying is that every time the data changes, the component changes. And it does it really fast, right? It's actually games building React, but you don't see the flicker because it refreshes at a high rate, right? It's like games. When you see a game that shows 60 frames per second, it's because the game is refreshing the screen 60 times per second, right? You can have that in React as well. Because when you change the data, React is refreshing the page. Everything that needs to be changed will be changed. That's what it's doing. And it's doing it really fast, and you don't have to worry about anything because you only have to change the data. Remember, if you change the data, whatever is connected to that data will also change. So your application is always showing the latest state. Make sense? Okay, so let's talk about a little bit of GSX. Some rules of GSX. So the first thing is that you can use all the HTML tags, similar tags, like divs and h1s and whatever tag. You also can use the buttons, right? Button is a regular HTML tag. Now, the way you add interactivity to these tags differs a little bit. For example, one property that we always use is the class property. Remember that? Well, in React, the name of that property changed from class to class name. So when you are creating a button in React, let's say you're using Bootstrap, you can still use Bootstrap, right? And remember that the classes for a button in Bootstrap are btn and let's say btn success, right? So instead of using class like this, you will have to use class name, okay? So that's a big difference. And the other difference is that you don't need to remember in the DOM, when we're using the DOM and we want to add some interactivity to a button, we will have to get the button with the document query selector and then use the add event listener. Well, we don't have to do that anymore. We have something called events on the every element, and there is an event called onClick. And you can pass a function, and that function will be executed when the button is clicked, in this case, right? So class name is the first one, so no class, it's just class name. And then you have events already in the element itself. This doesn't exist in HTML. By the way, if you put onClick on an HTML page and you try to make it work, it doesn't work. But in a GSX button, it will work. It will call this function if you click on that button, right? So as you can see, simplifies a lot the creation of interfaces because we don't have to get the element and then add the event listener. We don't have to add event listeners anymore. We just do onClick, and whatever function we put there, that function is going to be called every time you click that button, okay? So a lot simpler. And by the way, you need to use, the other thing of GSX is you need to use curly brackets. So curly brackets is the way for us to replace JavaScript expressions. Let me put an example. If you have, let's say, a variable, and you want to replace that variable in GSX, you can use the curlies and just put the expression inside. Okay? Now, because this is an expression, remember all the rules for expressions that we learned from last week, like remember the OR? You can still do that, right? Because whatever is inside is an expression. So it's JavaScript, essentially. And for the attributes, we use, the, so remember, in HTML, when you have an attribute in a tag, it's always attribute name equals quotes and the attribute value, right? Remember that from HTML? In GSX, it's exactly the same. Like, for example, here, class name, I can say the class, this is the class alert. But if you want to make this an expression, you can wrap the whole attribute that you can assign the attribute to curly brackets and then pass an expression there. So let's say if I want to change the class name for div. And I can say, okay, this will be an alert danger, right? And I can use here class name for div. So here I'm replacing the value of that variable for the assigning that to the attribute class name. Okay? And it's also pretty common because we want to pass dynamically any type of property.
So you can basically toggle classes.
Sorry?
Like if let's say you have two classes, one with visibility.
Yeah. I mean class,
Okay.
but that's true for HTML. You can pass as many classes as you want.
But I mean, are you able to change those places?
Yeah. So let's say I have a property. Let's make this a component, right? Function alert or name alert, and I have a props component, props property here. Right? So now this is a React component. Okay? You see the component?
Mm-hmm.
Name alert, that's the name of the component. And the component is taking a property called name. Just a name. That means that when I'm rendering this component, when I'm using this component, sorry, it will be something like this. Name alert, and I can pass the name property. Correct? Now, what is this component rendering? What is this component showing on the page? An alert with the name, right? So this is going to be replaced in the page by the rendering, and the rendering will be something like this. Class equals alert danger, and then inside we'll say John. So this will become this in the page, in the app. Do you see it? Everybody see it? So when I'm calling this component, passing that property name, and the component gets executed or rendered, the component in the page, in the final web page, will show a div with class alert danger, with the name inside, and that will be all. Because notice that I'm returning that. I'm returning a div. Remember, class name is actually the class. And what is the value of this variable? Alert danger. It's just a variable. It's a JavaScript. It's a regular variable from JavaScript. So that value will be replaced here in the class name. So that means that I will render a div with the class alert danger. The name will be inside, and that will be all. So that's what I have exactly here. A div with the class alert danger. The name will be inside, and that's all. Right? Now, if I change the name from John to Mary, then here we'll say, okay, it's Mary. Right? So every time you change the properties, the rendering changes. Now, let's make it a little bit more interesting. What if we do this? Let's call a props.danger, then do an alert danger, or do an alert info. And notice that I'm changing the rendering now, and I'm expecting another. Let's call it is danger. I'm calling another property is danger. Now, is danger is not being set, so that means that it's false, and that means that here it will show actually alert info exactly. If I want to pass an alert and danger, I will have to pass the is danger true. like this. Right? Because now I'm passing two properties. One is name, and the other one is danger. Name, well, we know what it does was doing with name. But for the is danger, it's checking this is danger, then use this value. So class name for div is a variable that changes the value depending on the property. If it's danger, then you will show alert danger. If it's not, where?
No, no.
It's because, oh, okay. Now it will be danger. Yeah, got it. Okay. I change the value and then it will be danger because I pass it as true. But if I pass it as false, then it will be info, right? Now, when you don't pass, if the property is a Boolean or something and you don't pass it, it will be undefined. And remember, undefined is false, right?
Only true is true.
Only true is true, exactly. Now, the other, when you put it like this, in just a side note, in JSX, this is the equivalent of doing this. So when you pass an attribute and you don't specify the value, that means that it's true. We will pass it as true. You want to explicitly set it as true, then it will be like this. But you get the point. It's like whatever attributes you pass to the component, those attributes are received in the component in the props parameter. And you can use them to render a different element, a different view of the element. Right? Questions? Questions? So that's GSX. Today's practice is mostly focused on GSX. We will get to build a component, but it's mostly focused on GSX. So well, I will stop here. My